my sister said. It was unfair I lived alone in my big house and demanded to move in. I refused and cut off the money I had been giving her family. She tried to drag others into this mess, but it backfired badly. I'm 41 years old and I live in Columbus, Ohio. I'm a senior project manager at a logistics company, and I've been with them for 16 years. I don't say that to brag. I say that because every single thing I have, my house, my car, my savings, I earned by showing up, staying late, and saying yes to every opportunity that scared me. Nobody handed me anything. And that matters for what I'm about to tell you. My sister Kristen is 36. She's 5 years younger than me, and growing up we were actually close, like genuinely close. She used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and I would make up stories until she fell asleep. I loved her so much it physically hurt sometimes. I want you to keep that in mind because what happened between us didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of me loving someone who slowly started seeing that love is something she was owed. Kristen got married at 23 to a guy named Todd. Todd was fine. He worked at a car dealership. He liked fantasy football and he had this habit of laughing too loud at his own jokes. But he was decent enough. They had 3 kids pretty fast. Aiden, who's now 11, McKenna, who's 9, and little Sawyer, who just turned 6. And look, I adore those kids. I really do. But having 3 children in 5 years when neither parent had a stable career, that was a choice, and nobody was allowed to say that out loud. Here's where things started to shift. About 7 years ago, Todd got laid off. Then he got another job and quit. Then he tried to start a pressure washing business that lasted about 4 months. Kristen was working part-time at a daycare, making almost nothing. Me, I was single, no kids, climbing the ladder at work, and I had just closed on my house. 4 bedrooms, a nice yard, a 2-car garage. I was so proud of that house. I remember walking through it the first night barefoot, just touching the walls like I couldn't believe they were mine. And then the phone calls started. Kristen would call maybe once a week at first. "Hey Bridge, things are tight this month. Could you spot us for groceries?" And of course, I said yes, she's my sister. Then it was the electric bill, then it was Aiden's school supplies, then McKenna needed glasses, then Sawyer had an ear infection and the copay was more than they expected. Every single time I said yes, because what was I supposed to do? Let the kids go without. But here's what nobody tells you about being the one who always helps. People stop seeing it as generosity. They start seeing it as your job. And if you ever hesitate even for a second, suddenly you're the villain. Do you think I noticed that shift happening? Honestly, no. Not at first. It crept in so slowly. Over the course of about 5 years, I estimate I gave Kristen and Todd somewhere around $60,000. I actually sat down one night with my bank statements and added it all up, and I felt sick. $60,000. That's someone's down payment. That's 2 years of retirement contributions. That's a life I could have built differently. And I never once got a thank you card. Not once. I got, "You're the best, Bridge," over text, usually followed by another request 2 weeks later. Now let me be honest about something. People sometimes ask me, don't I want a family of my own? Don't I want kids? And the answer is complicated. I did. I really did for a long time. But I spent my 30s working 60-hour weeks funding my sister's household and putting myself last. I went on dates here and there, but I never had the energy to invest in a real relationship. My friend Lorraine, she's been my closest friend since college. She used to say, "Bridge, you're mothering Kristen's whole family instead of building your own." And she was right. But when you're in it, you don't see it. So let me get to that dinner. It was last October. Kristen called and said she wanted to bring the kids over for a visit. I said, "Great," made lasagna, set the table, even bought a cake because Sawyer had just started first grade and I wanted to celebrate. The kids came in screaming and running everywhere. Normal kid stuff, fine. Kristen sat down at the kitchen island, poured herself a glass of my wine and didn't even say hello properly. She just looked around the kitchen and said, "Must be nice." I laughed it off. "It is nice. I worked hard for it." She didn't laugh back. She said, "I mean 4 bedrooms for 1 person. Meanwhile, I've got 3 kids sharing 2 rooms in a house with no dishwasher." I felt my stomach drop. Not because she was wrong about her situation, but because of the way she said it like it was my fault. I tried to change the subject, but Kristen wasn't done. "You know what, Bridge? It's kind of unfair, don't you think? You sit here alone in this big house with your wine and your fancy lasagna and I'm drowning. You don't even have kids. What do you need all this space for?" I put my fork down and I said very calmly, "Chris, I bought this house with money I earned. I chose it because I wanted it. I don't need to justify the space." She rolled her eyes. Actually, rolled her eyes at me. And then she said the thing that changed everything. She leaned forward and said, If you were a good person like a really good sister, you'd let us move in, permanently. You have the room, you just don't want to share. I sat there for a moment and I smiled, not a happy smile. The kind of smile that comes right before you make a decision you can't take back. I said, "That won't work, Chris." She blinked. "What?" "It won't work, you're not moving in." And then she stood up, grabbed her wine glass and said, "Wow, you really are as cold as Todd says you are." I let that sit in the air. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just started clearing the plates. But inside, I was on fire. Because this wasn't just about that night. This was about 7 years of writing checks and getting nothing but criticism in return. 7 years of biting my tongue. 7 years of being the good sister while she played the victim. And something in me decided that night in my kitchen, while she gathered her kids and left without saying goodbye, something in me decided that the ATM was officially closed. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should have handled it differently. But honestly, can you imagine someone eating your food, drinking your wine, sitting in the house you paid for and telling you you're a bad person for not handing it all over? Because that's what happened. My friend Lorraine called me later that night. I told her everything, and she said one thing that stuck with me. She said, "Bridge, you didn't lose a sister tonight. You just stopped pretending the sister you had was the one you deserved." And that hit me hard because she was right. But here's the thing. Kristen didn't take my no quietly, not even close. What she did next honestly shocked me. And what I did, after that, well, let's just say I surprised myself too. So after that dinner, I thought maybe Kristen would cool off. Maybe she'd wake up the next morning, replay what she said, and feel even a little bit embarrassed. That's what a reasonable person would do, right? But Kristen didn't call to apologize. She called to double down. 3 days later, she sent me a text that said, "And I wish I were making this up. I talked to Todd, and we think the fair thing would be for you to at least let the kids stay with you during the school week so they can have their own rooms. You're not using them anyway." Not a question, not a request. A decision she and Todd had apparently made together about my house. My house that I pay the mortgage on. My house that has my name on the deed. They just decided. I didn't respond. Not that day, not the next day. And honestly, the silence felt powerful. For the first time in 7 years, I wasn't rushing to fix things, wasn't scrambling to say yes, wasn't transferring money at midnight so Kristen's electricity wouldn't get shut off. I just sat in my living room, drank my coffee, and let my phone buzz without picking it up. And that drove Kristen absolutely crazy. She called me 4 times the next day, left 2 voicemails. The first one was sweet, suspiciously sweet. "Hey Bridge, just checking in. Love you. Call me back." The second one had the real Kristen. "Okay, so you're just ignoring me now. Real mature, Bridget. Real mature." Lorraine told me to hold the line. She said, "The moment you respond, she'll find a crack to squeeze through. Just wait." And Lorraine was right, because what happened next was something I genuinely did not expect. Kristen showed up at my job. I need you to picture this. I'm sitting in a meeting with 6 people presenting a quarterly logistics report. Very professional, very serious. And my coworker Denise knocks on the glass door and mouths, "Your sister's in the lobby." I almost choked on my water. I excused myself, walked out to the lobby, and there was Kristen standing by the front desk with Sawyer on her hip, looking like she'd been crying. And she says loud enough for the receptionist to hear, "I just need 5 minutes with my sister. She won't return my calls and my kids are suffering." Do you see what she did there? She made it public. She brought a child as a prop. She turned my workplace into her stage. And for a split second, I'm not going to lie, it almost worked. Because Sawyer looked at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Hi, Auntie Bridge." And my heart cracked a little. But I didn't fold. I walked her outside, sat on a bench in the parking lot and said, "Chris, you cannot show up at my office. Ever. This is where I work. This is how I make the money that has been keeping your family afloat for almost a decade." She started crying harder. "You act like you're better than me." "I don't think I'm better than you. I think I'm tired." "Tired of what?" "Of helping your own family." "Tired of being used, Chris. There's a difference." She wiped her face and said something that actually made me laugh. She said, "Fine, then just co-sign a loan for us so we can get a bigger place." I looked at her. I said, "You want me to co-sign a loan for you and Todd, who has had 9 jobs in 7 years and a credit score that probably starts with a 4. She didn't even deny it. She just said, "See, there you go, being judgmental again." Honestly, I don't know if I should have laughed, but I did. Right there in the parking lot. Because at some point, the audacity becomes genuinely comedic. Like, what was next? Was she going to ask me to adopt her kids and also pay her a salary for visiting them on weekends? Eh? I said no to the cosign, obviously, and I said something I'd been holding in for a very long time. I said, Chris, I'm not giving you any more money. Not for groceries, not for bills, not for the kids' activities, not for Todd's next business idea. It's done. I love you, but the bank is closed. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Then she said, you're going to regret this. And she left. Drove away with Sawyer still looking at me through the back window. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, I found out what you're going to regret this meant. Kristen called our parents. Now my mom and dad, Patricia and Jean. They live in Dayton, about 2 hours from Columbus. They're both retired. Dad was a machinist, mom was a school secretary. Good people, quiet people. They don't like drama. And Kristen knew exactly how to play them. She called mom crying, big ugly theatrical crying, and told her that I had abandoned her family, that I refused to help with the kids, that I told her she was a bad mother. None of which, by the way, was true. Mom called me Friday morning. She sounded worried. She said, Bridget, honey, what's going on with you and your sister? She says you've cut her off. I took a breath and I told her everything. Not just the dinner, not just the parking lot, everything. The $60,000, the constant requests, the guilt trips, the entitlement, the fact that Kristen called my house wasted space. I told her about Todd's revolving door of jobs. I told her that I hadn't saved properly for retirement because I was too busy being Kristen's emergency fund. I said all of it. And here's where the unexpected part happens. Because I assumed mom would do what she always did, try to smooth things over, tell me family is family, ask me to be the bigger person. That's what she'd done my whole life. Every argument, every conflict, mom's answer was always, just keep the peace, Bridget. But this time she went quiet for a long time. And then she said, $60,000, give or take. Another long pause. Then mom said, I'm calling your sister. That's all she said. No lecture for me, no guilt trip, no, but she's your sister. Just I'm calling your sister. And she hung up. I found out later from my dad what happened on that call, and honestly, I almost felt bad for Kristen. Almost. Mom called Kristen and told her, and Dad said mom's voice was the coldest he'd heard in 40 years of marriage. She told Kristen that she should be ashamed of herself, that Bridget had done more for her family than any sister should ever have to. That $60,000 was more than Dad made in a year before he retired. And then, Mom said the thing that apparently made Kristen go completely silent. She said, your sister doesn't have a family of her own, Kristen. Have you ever stopped to think about why? Have you ever wondered if maybe she spent the years she should have been dating and building her life, writing checks so your children could eat? Dad said Kristen didn't have an answer for that, but Mom wasn't finished. She said, and another thing, you and Todd need to get jobs. Real jobs, both of you, full-time. No more excuses about the kids, no more sob stories, no more calling Bridget every time the rent is due. You're 36 years old, figure it out. Can you imagine my mother, sweet, quiet Patricia, who has never raised her voice at a Thanksgiving dinner, basically told Kristen to grow up and get a job? Dad said she hung up the phone, turned to him and said, I should have said that 5 years ago. And then she made herself a cup of tea like nothing happened. I laughed so hard when Dad told me that, because that is exactly who my mother is. She's a slow burn. You think she's not paying attention, and then she absolutely levels you with one conversation. Now, Kristen clearly expected Mom and Dad to take her side. That was the whole strategy. Run to the parents, cry, make Bridget look heartless, get them to pressure me into caving. It had worked before. When we were younger, if Kristen and I fought, Mom would always tell me to compromise because I was older. Kristen was counting on that pattern. But patterns break. And when Mom turned on her, I don't even mean turned on her, just told her the truth for the first time, Kristen didn't know what to do. She didn't call me for 3 weeks after that. Absolute silence. No texts, no voicemails, nothing. And you know what? Those 3 weeks were the most peaceful weeks I'd had in years. I went to dinner with Lorraine. I repainted my guest room, the one with the broken blinds, thanks to Aiden. I started putting real money into my 401k again. I even went on a date with a guy named Marcus from my gym. Nothing serious, but it was nice to feel like a person again instead of a safety net. But then something weird happened, and I mean genuinely weird. I came home from work one evening, and there was a note tucked into my front door. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten note on notebook paper, folded in half. It was from Todd. And what he wrote in that note, honestly, I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it. But it changed the direction of everything. I'll tell you what it said very soon, and trust me, I did not see it coming. So I'm standing on my porch holding this folded piece of notebook paper, and I genuinely don't know what to expect. Because Todd and I have never had a real conversation, not once in 13 years. He's always just been there in the background, laughing at his own jokes, letting Kristen do all the talking and all the asking. I honestly couldn't have told you what Todd's handwriting looked like before that moment. I unfolded it, and it said something like this. Bridget, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I wouldn't want to hear from me either. I heard what your mom said to Kristen, all of it. I've been sitting with it for 3 weeks and I can't sleep. You gave us $60,000. I didn't know the number until your mom said it. I don't think Kristen knew either. We never added it up because we never wanted to see it. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I got a full-time job at a distribution warehouse last Monday and I wanted you to know. I'm sorry. I don't think I've ever said that to you. Todd. I sat on my porch steps and read it 3 times. And yeah, I cried a little. Not because it fixed anything, it didn't, but because in 13 years that was the first time Todd ever acknowledged that what I did was real and that it cost me something. Now does the note erase 7 years of being used? No. But it told me at least one person in that house was starting to wake up. I didn't respond. Lorraine said wait and see if actions follow words. So I waited. 2 weeks later, Dad called casual like he was mentioning the weather. Todd's working full-time and your sister got a job at the front desk of a dentist's office. I could hear the relief in his voice. I said, good for them. And I meant it carefully. Dad paused and added, your mother hasn't stopped talking about that phone call. She keeps saying she enabled Kristen for too long. That surprised me. I never blamed Mom. She grew up in a family where you just helped each other no matter what. She didn't know how to draw lines because nobody taught her. And honestly, I inherited that from her. That's exactly why it took me 7 years and $60,000 to say no. Another month passed. December hit, and I started dreading Christmas. Our family always gathers at Mom and Dad's in Dayton, and I could not picture sitting across from Kristen pretending things were fine. Lorraine invited me to spend the holiday with her family in Cincinnati. I was seriously considering it. Then Kristen texted. First contact in almost 2 months. Can we talk? Not about money, just talk. I stared at it for a whole day. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted something sarcastic. But a bigger part, the part that still remembered her climbing into my bed during thunderstorms, typed back, Saturday, my house, just you, house. She pulled into my driveway in that beat-up minivan and sat in the car for 5 full minutes. I watched from the window. She was gripping the steering wheel, rehearsing something. When she walked in, she looked different. Not physically, she looked smaller. Not sad, humbled. Like someone who'd been wearing a costume for years and finally took it off. She sat at my kitchen island, same spot as that awful October dinner. I made coffee, set a mug in front of her, and waited. I was done being the person who fills silence to make everyone else comfortable. Finally, she said, I don't know how to start. Start with whatever's true. She stared into her mug. I've been a terrible sister to you. I didn't argue. I didn't rush to say, no, you haven't, because she was right. And the kindest thing I could do was let that truth sit there without softening it. She said, when Mom told me the number 60,000, I threw up. Literally went to the bathroom and threw up. Because I knew it was true and I'd never once thought about it as a total. Every time I asked, I told myself it was small, just groceries, just one bill. I never added it up because then I'd have to face what I was doing to you. Then her voice cracked. And when Mom said the part about you not having a family, about you spending your 30s keeping us afloat instead of building your own life, Bridget, it was like someone turned the lights on in a room I'd been sitting in for years. I never thought about it. I just told myself you were fine. Big house, big career. I told myself you were the lucky one. I put my mug down, and I said something I had never said out loud to anyone. Chris, I wanted kids. I wanted a partner. I wanted what you have. But every time I got close to focusing on myself, you needed something. And I couldn't say no because what kind of sister says no? So I said yes until there was nothing left to give anyone else. She cried. Not the theatrical kind from before, the quiet kind that comes when you actually hear something you can't unhear. I'm so sorry, Bridge. And here's where you might expect me to say, I forgave her instantly, and we hugged and everything was beautiful. But that's not real life. I said, I appreciate that, but sorry doesn't give me back my 30s. Sorry doesn't refund $60,000. Sorry doesn't undo years of feeling like a wallet with a heartbeat. I accept your apology, but forgiveness takes time, and I need to see real, sustained change. Not 3 good weeks followed by another call asking for rent. She nodded. No argument, no defensiveness, just, that's fair. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the counter. Inside was a check for $500. The memo line said, one of many. He shrugged. I know it's nothing compared to what you gave, but Todd and I made a budget for the first time in our lives. Every month we're paying you back even if it takes 10 years, 500 out of 60,000. Mathematically, it's a drop in the ocean, but it wasn't about the math. It was about her sitting down, writing that check, putting it in an envelope, and driving it to my house. It was about saying, I see what you sacrificed. Pick the check. I said, thank you. And then because I'm still Bridget and I'm still a little petty, I said, the blinds in the guest room are $78, by the way, adding that to the tab. She laughed. A real one. First real laugh I'd heard from her in a long time. And I laughed too. And just for a second, sitting there with our coffee, I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed. He was still in there somewhere. Christmas was quiet that year. I went to Dayton. Kristen and Todd and the kids were there. Nobody mentioned the money or the fight. Mom made her pot roast. Dad fell asleep watching football by halftime. The kids ran wild in the yard. Kristen and I didn't have some big dramatic moment. We just coexisted gently. Like two people learning to share a room again without resentment pressing down on everything. After dinner, she helped me wash dishes, side by side at the sink, like teenagers. She bumped me with her hip and said, nice house, and you still can't load a dishwasher, right? I bumped her back. Nice job, and you still can't let a joke go. Small but ours. That was 4 months ago. Todd's still working. Kristen's still at the dentist's office. I've gotten 3 more checks, 500 each, right on schedule. We text now, not like before. No money requests. Normal stuff. She sent me Sawyer's science project. I sent her mom's banana bread recipe. My fully healed. Well, I still get angry sometimes. I still calculate what my savings could look like. I still wonder what my life might be if I'd said no the very first time. That's okay. Healing isn't a straight line. But here's what I've learned. Saying no to someone you love is not cruelty. It might be the thing that saves the relationship. Because as long as I kept saying yes, Kristen had no reason to grow. My no was the first honest thing anyone said to her in years. It hurt us both. But it was the start of something real. Mom told me last week she's proud of me. She said, you did what I couldn't do. You told the truth and held the line. That meant more than any apology ever could. I'm still single. Still in my 4-bedroom house. But every room's repainted. I'm saving real money again. And Marcus from the gym asked me out last Tuesday. So maybe my 40s will be the decade I finally put myself first. And I mean that in the best way. Kristen and I have a long road ahead. But for the first time in years, we're walking the same direction. And my guest room has new blinds. So you know. So that's my story. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate a like. It means more than you think. And if something here reminded you of your own family, or you would have handled any of this differently, drop that in the comments. I read every single one, and your perspectives honestly help me feel less alone. Whether you're the Bridget in your family, the Kristen, or even the Todd who's finally waking up, I see you.